Chapter 24. The Winding Banks of Erne. The weather god was certainly good to us in Ireland. The occasional showers and 2 or 3 heavy downpours were merely short interludes, and by no means unpleasant ones, in the long succession of sweetly beautiful days which I remember when I run my mind back over those delightful weeks. That day at Bundoran was one of them, soft and fragrant, and altogether perfect. There is nothing Irish about Bundoran, except its climate. Not, at least, if one stays at the hotel which has been built there by the Great Northern Railroad, and which is one of the most satisfactory hotels I was ever in. And perhaps it would be as well to say a word here about Irish hotels. The small friendly inn, which is one of the delights of European travel, does not exist in Ireland. Or, if it does, it is so carelessly managed that it is not endurable. Commercial hotels are also apt to be inferior. The only hotels that are sure to be pleasant and satisfactory are the large ones which cater to tourist traffic. In the more important towns, of course, there is never any difficulty in finding a good hotel. In the smaller towns, the only safe rule is to go to the best in the place, and if there is one managed by the railway, that is usually the one to choose. Some years ago, the Irish Railways realised that the surest way to encourage tourist traffic in the west and south was to provide attractive hotel accommodations. And they set about doing this, with the result that the traveller in Ireland is now well provided for. Such hotels as those at Bundoran, Recess and Parknasilla, and there are many others like them, handsome buildings, splendidly equipped, set in the midst of beautiful surroundings, leave nothing to be desired. Nor are their rates excessive, considering the excellent service they offer, averaging a little over $3 a day. In the smaller towns, the tariff is considerably less than this, though the service is almost as good. In places where the railroad does not itself own or manage a hotel, it usually sees to it that at least one under private management is kept up to a satisfactory standard. So, no one wishing to explore Ireland need hesitate on account of the hotels. They will be found, with a few exceptions, surprisingly good. The hotel at Bundoran is set close to the edge of the scarred and weather-beaten cliffs, which look right out over the Atlantic toward America. It was along the top of these cliffs that we set out that Sunday morning, and below us lay the strand where 3 galleons of the Spanish Armada went to pieces as they were staggering homewards from the battle in the Channel. From time to time, an effort is made to find these treasure ships, but though cannon and anchors and such like gear have been recovered, no one as yet has found any treasure. The great waves which roll right in from the Atlantic, and which prove too much for the galleons, have worn the cliffs into the most fantastic shapes. And, a little way above the hotel, there is a natural arch, called the Ferry Bridge, some 25 feet wide, which the water has cut in the rocks. When the tide comes in, it may be seen boiling and bubbling below the bridge, as in a witch's cauldron. Most beautiful of all is a wide yellow strand a little farther on, with the rollers breaking far out and sweeping in white-topped majesty. We sat for a long time watching them, rolling in long lines, one behind the other. And then we scrambled down to the beach through the bare and shifting dunes. Seen thus from below, the black cliffs are most impressive. We went on again at last, over the upland toward a wide-flung camp, where the 4th Enniskillens were getting their summer practice, and one of the men directed us how to find a cromlech and a cairn, which we knew were there somewhere, but which we were unable to see amid the innumerable ridges. From the cairn, which crowns a little eminence overlooking the Erne estuary, there was supposed to be, so our acquaintance said, an underground passage to the other side of the river, where stands the old castle of the Folliots. But, as the estuary is at least a mile wide, I doubt if this ever existed, except in the imagination of the countryside. The castle is there, however. We could see its towers looming above the trees. But there was no way to get to it that day, for the river lay between. I was determined to see it closer before we left the neighbourhood, because it was from that castle that the fair Colleen Bawn eloped with Willie Riley. Farther down the stream, a 2-masted schooner lay wrecked beside a sandbank, and across from us some soldiers were fishing in tiny boats, while a company was going through some manoeuvres on the shore. So far away, they looked like a company of ants deploying this way and that. For a long time we watched them. Then we bade our companion goodbye, and went slowly back through the bracken, where Betty picked a great bouquet of primroses and violets and bluebells, and we stumbled upon another ancient burial place, and stopped at the ruins of an old church, and got back finally to the hotel to find the golf links full of industrious players. Betty got into talk with the owner of a shaggy English sheepdog, shaggy clear to its feet, and looking for all the world like Nana, the accomplished nurse of the Darling children. And I went on down to the beach to watch the tide come in. It was swirling threateningly about the black rocks, and out at the farthest point of them I found a man sitting. He invited me to sit down beside him, and we fell into talk. He was a handsome old fellow, a barrister from Dublin, who had come clear across Ireland, which isn't as far as it sounds, to get a breath of sea air. There was no air like the Bundoran air, he said, and 2 or 3 days of it did him a world of good. And then we began to talk about Ireland, and I was guilty of the somewhat banal remark that, before Ireland could make any real progress, life there would have to be made attractive enough to keep her young people at home, for she could never hope to get ahead as long as her best blood was drained away from her. He pooh-poohed the idea. The best advice you can give any Irishman or Irish girl, he said, is to leave the country the first chance they get. And that will always be good advice, because there will never be anything here for them to do. All this talk about the revival of industry is foolish. You can't revive what's dead, and industry here has been dead for 300 years. Besides, this is an agricultural country, and it will never be anything else. And over wide stretches of it, grazing pays better than tillage will ever do, so grazing there will be. Home rule will make no difference. How can it? I suppose we're going to get it, and I'll be glad to see it come, if only to stop this ceaseless agitation. But, as for its reviving any industries, or increasing wages, or making Ireland a place for ambitious young people to live in, I don't believe it. You don't foresee a roseate future then? Not for Ireland. All these schemes for land purchase and new cottages and pensions and so on may make life here a little more comfortable than it has been. But this country has been in a lethargy for centuries, and it will never be shaken off. The Irish have no ambition. They just live along from day to day without any thought for the future, and they will always be like that. It's their nature. He would doubtless have said more to the same effect, for he was very much in earnest. But the rising tide drove us in, and I did not see him again. The picturesque old town of Ballyshannon is only a few miles from Bundoran, and we took train for it next morning, after a last stroll along the cliffs and a look at the rock pool, a treasure house of fossils and marine growths of every kind. First of all we wanted to see the Colleen Bawn Castle, so we got a car at the station and set out. Ballyshannon, after the fashion of Irish towns, is built on the side of a hill, and no horse unaccustomed to mountaineering could have got up the street which leads from the river. But our horse had been reared in the town, so he managed to scramble up. And then we turned to the left and followed along the river to the falls, a dashing mass of spray, where the whole body of water which rushes down from Lough Erne sweeps roaring over a cliff some 30 feet high. 2 or 3 miles along country roads brought us to a gate, and here our driver, looking a little anxious, had a short conference with a woman who lived in a neat labourer's cottage nearby. And finally, he opened the gate and drove through. Half a mile along this lane brought us to another gate, and there our driver stopped and showed us the castle just ahead, and said that was all the farther he could go, and that we would have to walk the rest of the way. There was a certain constraint in his manner which I did not understand till afterwards. We went on through the gate, and across what had once been the domain, but had been swept bare of trees, and was now divided between a meadow and a stable yard. And in a few minutes we stood before the castle, which was the scene of a romance very dear to Irish hearts. It is not really a castle, but merely a tall and ugly house, with 3 bays and a low terrace in front, and it is not very old, since it dates only from 1739, when it was built as the home of the Folliots, a powerful English family into whose hands this whole neighbourhood had fallen. The Folliots, of course, were Protestants, and Willie Riley was a Catholic. But Helen Folliot was so ill-advised as to fall in love with him, and one night packed up her jewels and eloped. A hue and cry was raised after them, and they were soon captured, and Riley was thrown into Sligo jail, and it looked for a while as though he might be stretched, for all this happened about 1745, when the penal laws against Catholics were most severe. But the fair Helen came to the rescue, and swore at the trial that she had been the leader in the affair, not Riley, and so he escaped with a sentence of banishment. What happened thereafter, history does not state, but Will Carleton, who wove a poor romance about the affair, manages to reunite the lovers in the end. It is not to be wondered at that Riley became a popular hero. Here was a young and handsome Catholic who, in the most daring way, had captured the heart of a great Protestant heiress, the daughter of a persecutor of Catholics, and, in addition, a girl so lovely that she was the toast of the whole countryside. The ballad which celebrated the affair had an immense vogue. It is a real ballad, rough and halting, but rudely eloquent. You remember how it starts. "Oh, rise up, Willie Riley, and come alongst with me. I mean for to go with you, and leave this country. To leave my father's dwelling, his houses and fine lands. And away goes Willie Riley, and his dear Colleen Bawn." In the ballad, the family is called Folliard, which is the way the name is still pronounced in the neighbourhood. But the old mansion is now occupied by a tenant. And, pretty soon, we understood our Jarvie's uneasiness, for first a man came to the front door and looked at us, and then went quickly in again. And then an old woman opened the side door and glared at us, and when we asked if we might have a glimpse of the interior, slammed the door in our faces. I must give her credit, however, for restraining a particularly savage-looking dog eager to be at us. But it was evident we weren't wanted there, for even the turkey gobbler resented our visit, and strutted fiercely about us, trying to scare us out. So we went back to the car, and our Jarvie breathed a sigh of relief when he saw us. "Sure, I didn't know whether you'd come back alive or not," he said. "The master is away from home today, and the woman that does work for him wouldn't be above setting the dog on you. But it's all right, glory be to God." And he climbed up to his box and drove us back to Ballyshannon. We left our luggage at the station of the Donegal narrow gauge railway, and then walked down into the town. We found it a quaint place, with the friendliest of people, and we were fortunate in discovering a clean inn on the main street, where we had the nicest of lunches, after which we set off to see the Abbey. The road to the Abbey lies through a deep romantic dell, at the bottom of which we found a grain mill working, its great wheel turned by the brook which rushes through the glen. And a little farther on were 4 or 5 other mills, all fallen to decay, their wheels mere skeletons, and their machinery red with rust. Just beyond, a little higher up the hill, stands all that is left of the Abbey, a few shattered fragments of the old walls. Yet the Abbey was, in its day, a great foundation, patronised by the mighty Prince of Tyrconnell, and taking its name of Assaroe from the falls in the river. Rua, the waterfall of red hue, who was High King of Erne about 3 centuries before Christ, and who was swept over the falls and drowned while trying to cross the ford above them. A boy who played about the ruins described them, when he grew to manhood, in a musical stanza. "Grey, grey is Abbey Assaroe by Ballyshanny town. It has neither door nor window, the walls are broken down. The carven stones lie scattered in briars and nettle bed. The only feet are those that come at burial of the dead. A little rocky rivulet runs murmuring to the tide, singing a song of ancient days, in sorrow, not in pride. The boar tree and the lightsome ash across the portal grow, and heaven itself is now the roof of Abbey Assaroe." We had heard certain legends of underground passages which could still be explored, and we asked an old man who was cutting grass in the graveyard if he knew anything about them, and he said that he did not. We remarked that it was a hard task cutting the grass around the gravestones, and he said it was so, and would not be worth doing, but that the grass was given to him for the cutting. But the guardians were unreasonable men who wanted it cut long before it was ready. It ought really to stand a week longer now, but them ones would not wait. We went back past the mill and met a man in flour-besprinkled clothes, who bade us good day and stopped to talk, and it proved to be the miller. He invited us in to see the mill, which was grinding Russian corn, very red and hard, into yellow meal which was used for feeding cattle. We tried to tell him something of the delights of cornbread and griddle cakes, but he was plainly sceptical. He was an Ulster man, and had been running the mill for 3 years, but he said it was a hard struggle to make both ends meet. If it was not that his power cost him nothing, he would have had to give up long ago. Power apart, I could imagine no poorer place for a mill, for it was at least 2 miles from the railway, and the road into the hollow was so steep that it must be a terrific struggle to get a loaded wagon into or out of it. There had been a number of mills in the neighbourhood at one time, but they had all given up the struggle long ago, except one flour mill, which had somehow managed to survive. We told him that we had seen the ruins of some of them as we went to the Abbey. "Have you been to the Abbey?" he asked. "Did you see the underground passages? Are there really some? Come along, and I'll show you." We protested that we didn't want him to leave his work, but he said the mill could take care of itself for a while. And we started off together up the hill, through a gate to the right, and then knee-deep through the grass to the brook which ran at the bottom of the ravine, under the walls of the monastery. And there, sure enough, was the mouth of a passage cut in the solid rock of the bank. It was about 6 feet high by 3 wide, and ran in about 100 feet, for all the world like the entrance to a mine. How much farther it extended I don't know, for an iron gate had been put across it to keep out explorers. But there can be no doubt that, at one time, it connected with the Abbey itself, and formed a secret means of ingress and egress, which was, no doubt, often very convenient. And then our guide showed us something else, which was far more interesting. In the penal days, Catholic priests were forbidden to celebrate Mass under the severest penalties. But, nevertheless, they managed to hold a service now and then in some out-of-the-way place, carefully concealed, with sentries posted all about, to guard against surprise. A short distance downstream from the entrance to the secret passage was a shallow cave in the cliff, so overhung with ivy that it could scarcely be seen, and here, many times, the Catholics of the neighbourhood had gathered at word that a priest would celebrate Mass. On the heights all about, lookouts would be placed, and then the men and women would kneel before the mouth of the little cave and take part in the sacrament. At the back of the cave, the shelf of rock which served as the altar still remains, and at one side of it is a rude piscina, a basin hollowed in the rock, with a small hole in the bottom to drain it. And it was here the vessels used in the celebration of the Mass were washed, after the service was over. I wanted mightily to get a picture of this cave, but it had started to shower, and, though I got under the umbrella and made an exposure, the picture was a failure. We bade our guide goodbye, with many thanks for his kindness, and went slowly back along the high road toward Ballyshannon. And presently from a tiny cottage beside the road, 2 old women issued and greeted us with great cordiality. They were clean and neatly dressed, and the younger one, who did most of the talking, seemed to be quite unusually interested in our private history and solicitous for our welfare. And the blarney with which her tongue plastered us was the most finished I have ever listened to. We thanked her for her good wishes, and were about to go on, much pleased at this new demonstration of Irish cordiality, when we had a rude awakening. "Ah, your honour," she said, "would you not be giving me something for my poor sister here? You see she's all twisted with rheumatism, and can scarcely walk, and the medicine to be costing so much that she often must go without it. Just a small coin, God bless ye." I didn't want to give her anything, for I suspected that she made a practice of waylaying passers-by and begging from them. And then I looked at the older woman, who was standing by with her hands crossed before her, and I saw how the fingers were twisted and withered, and how the face was drawn with pain. So I compromised by dropping 6pence into the outstretched hand. "If your honour would only be making it 8pence now," the woman said quickly, "we can get 3 bottles of castor oil for 8pence. But the other woman stopped her. "No, no," she protested. "Take shame to yourself for asking the kind gentleman for more. We thank your honour, and God bless ye, and may he bring ye safe home." And the other woman joined in the blessings too, and they continued to bless us, considerably to our embarrassment, until we were out of earshot. Betty had had enough of Ballyshannon. Besides, the showers were coming with increasing force and frequency, so she elected to go back to the railway station and rest, while I wandered about for a last look at the town. And now, I suppose, I shall have to say a word about its history. All this country to the north of Lough Erne is Tyrone, Tír Owen, the province of Owen, and was once a great principality, which stretched eastward clear to the shore of the channel about Belfast. Northwest of it, answering roughly to the present county of Donegal, was Tír Conaill, the province of Conaill. And Conaill and Owen were brothers, sons of Niall of the Nine Hostages, who was King of Ireland from 379 to 405, and whose 8 sons cut Ireland up between them into the principalities which were, in time, by their own internecine warfare, to make Ireland incapable of defending herself against the invader. St. Patrick, about 450, found Conaill in his castle on Lough Erne and baptised him. And then he journeyed north to Owen's great fortress, which we shall see before long on a hill overlooking Lough Swilly, and baptised him. 5 centuries later, when Brian Boru had brought all Ireland to acknowledge his kingship, he decreed that every family should take a surname from some distinguished ancestor. And so began the era of the O's and the Macs. The 2 great clans of Tyrone and Tír Conaill chose the names of O'Neill and O'Donnell, and the River Erne was the frontier of the O'Donnell domain. There was a ford here at Ballyshannon, and so, of course, a castle to guard it, and many were the herds of lifted cattle which the O'Donnells, sallying south into Sligo, drove back before them into Donegal. Cattle was the principal form of property in those old days, about the only kind, at least, that could be stolen, and so it was always cattle that the raiders went after. The English brought a great force against the place in 1597, and for 3 days besieged the castle, and tried unavailingly to carry it by assault. And then the O'Donnell clans poured down from the hills, and the English, seeing themselves trapped, tried to cross the river at the ford just above the falls. And the strongest managed to get across, but the women and the wounded and the weak were swept away. There is no trace remaining of the castle, but just below the graceful bridge of stone which crosses the river is the ford over which the English poured that day. And an ugly ford it is, for the water runs deep and strong, quickening at its lower edge into the rapids above the falls. From the centre of this bridge, some 25 years ago, the ashes of one of Ireland's truest poets were scattered on the swift, smooth-running water and carried down to the sea, and a tablet marks the spot. William Allingham, a native of this town, born 1824, died 1889. Here once he roved, a happy boy, along the winding banks of Erne, and now, please God, with finer joy, a fairer world his eyes discern. It is certainly a halting quatrain, quite unworthy the immortality of marble. A couplet from Allingham's own poem in praise of his birthplace would have been far more fitting. But I suppose that the lines on the tablet were composed by some local dignitary, and that nobody dared tell him how bad they were. I know of no more graceful tribute to any town than Allingham paid to Ballyshannon in his Winding Banks of Erne. The first stanza gives a savour of its quality. Adieu to Ballyshanny, where I was bred and born. Go where I may, I'll think of you, as sure as night and morn. The kindly spot, the friendly town, where every one is known, and not a face in all the place, but partly seems my own. There's not a house or window, there's not a field or hill, but east or west, in foreign lands, I'll recollect them still. I leave my warm heart with you, though my back I'm forced to turn. Adieu to Ballyshanny, and the winding banks of Erne. You will note that the savour is the same as that of the lines I have already quoted describing Abbey Asa Row, and of course the same hand wrote them. I wish I could quote the whole poem to Ballyshannon, for it is worth quoting, but one more stanza must suffice, the last one. If ever I'm a moneyed man, I mean please God to cast my golden anchor in the place where youthful years were past. Though heads that now are black or brown must meanwhile gather grey, new faces rise by every hearth, and old ones drop away. Yet dearer still that Irish hill than all the world beside. It's home, sweet home, where'er I roam, through lands and waters wide. And if the Lord allows me, I surely will return to my native Ballyshanny and the winding banks of Erne. His birthplace is not far away, one of a row of plain old stone houses standing in the mall, with the tablet. William Allingham, poet, born in this house, 19th of March, 1824. I walked on past it, down to the river below the falls, where, close to the water's edge, a seat has been placed under a rustic canopy. And I sat there for a long time and watched the foaming water rushing over the cliff, with a crash and roar which, as Allingham says, is the voice of the town. Solemn, persistent, humming through the air day and night, summer and winter. Whenever I think of that town, I seem to hear the voice. The river which makes it runs over rocky ledges into the tide. Before spreads a great ocean in sunshine or storm. Behind stretches a many-islanded lake. On the south runs a wavy line of blue mountains, and on the north over green rocky hills rise peaks of a more distant range. It is up from the ocean the salmon come in the spring, seeking a place to spawn, and before they can get into the many-islanded lake, they have to pass the falls. It is a 10-foot leap, even at flood tide, but they take it, and a beautiful sight it must be to see them do it. But I saw none that day. Just below the falls is a little island, Inishammer, said to be the spot where the firbolgs, the earliest inhabitants of Ireland, first touched foot to Irish soil. It is given over now to some small buildings connected with the fishery, which is very valuable. There were a number of boats out that day, with fishermen in them patiently whipping the water, but I did not see any fish caught. Ballyshannon is not, I judge, so prosperous as it once was, for across the river from where I sat were a number of tall mills and warehouses, empty and evidently dropping to decay. But it is more bustling than many other towns in Ireland, and is perhaps not sunk quite so deeply into the slough of despond. And then again, as the towering mass of the Belfast Bank in the main street warned me as I walked back through the village, we were getting nearer to the hustling north. The little train we were to take for Donegal backed up to the platform soon after I reached the station. It is a narrow gauge road, and the coaches are miniature affairs, scarcely high enough to stand up in, as we found when we entered. And just then the heavens opened, and the rain poured down in sheets. We closed door and windows, and congratulated ourselves that we were snug and dry. And then the other passengers began to arrive, soaked through and dripping wet. And, as the train consisted of only 2 coaches, our compartment was soon invaded by 2 women and 2 girls, whose gowns were fairly plastered to them. They dried themselves as well as they could, but little streams of water continued to trickle off of them for half an hour. The road runs through a bare, bleak valley for the first part of the way, clinging perilously to the hillside, and then climbs steeply over the watershed into the valley of the Ballintra, which is green and smiling and apparently prosperous, and at last winds down along the shore of Donegal Bay, through a district of orchards and lush meadows and beautiful hedges and comfortable houses, and so into the picturesque town, Downanall, the fort of the strangers, the ancient seat of the O'Donnells. But to me, Donegal, town and county, has one connotation which overshadows all others, and that is with Father O'Flynn. Just where he lived I don't know, but the tribute which Alfred Percival Graves paid him is the most eloquent ever paid in rhyme to any priest, and, as a comment upon the effort of selfish politicians to fan the flame of religious bigotry in Ireland, it is worth remembering that it was written by a Protestant. Do you know the poem? Well, if you do, you will be glad to read it again, and, if you do not, you will have every reason to thank me for introducing you to it. So, just to give myself the pleasure of writing it, I am going to quote it entire, for it would be a crime to leave out a line of it. Father O'Flynn. Of priests we can offer a charming variety, far renowned for learning and piety. Still I'd advance you without impropriety. Father O'Flynn is the flower of them all. Here's a health to you, Father O'Flynn. Sláinte and sláinte and sláinte again. Powerfulest preacher and tenderest teacher, and kindliest creature in our Donegal. Don't talk of your provost and fellows of Trinity, famous forever at Greek and Latinity. Faith in the devils and all the divinity, Father O'Flynn 'd make hares of them all. Come, I venture to give ye my word, never the likes of his logic was heard. Down from mythology into theology, truth and conchology, if heed the call. Och, Father O'Flynn, you've the wonderful way with you. All out sinners are wishful to pray with you. All the young children are wild for to play with you. You've such a way with you, Father of Vic. Still, for all you've so gentle a soul, guard you've your flock in the grandest control, checking the crazy ones, coaxing uneasy ones, lifting the lazy ones on with the stick. And though quite avoiding all foolish frivolity, still at all seasons of innocent jollity, where was the playboy could claim any quality, at comicality, Father, with you. Once the bishop looked grave at your jest, till this remark set him off with the rest. Is it lave gaiety, all to the laity? Cannot the clergy be Irishmen too? There is a quaint old inn in Donegal, with dining and sitting rooms crowded with curiosities gathered from the 4 quarters of the globe by the proprietor, who was once a soldier, and his daughter looks after the comfort of the guests. And we had there that night a most satisfying dinner. And then, as it was still quite light, I filled my pipe and started out to stroll about the town. But I hadn't gone far when I heard a bell being rung with great violence, and when I looked again, I saw the small boy who was ringing it. And when he passed me, I asked him what the matter was, and he handed me a poster, printed most gorgeously in red and black, and these were the first lines of it. Town Hall, Donegal, Monday evening, June 23rd, 1913. Monster attraction. Powerful performance for the benefit of Mr. Joe Cullen, the old Donegal favourite, on which occasion the ladies and gentlemen of the Donegal Amateur Dramatic and Variety Club will appear. Then followed the programme. There were to be 4 scenes from the ever-popular play entitled Robert Emmet, also the laughable sketch entitled The Cottage by the Sea, also the Irish farce Miss Muldowney from Ireland, the whole to be interspersed with variety turns by members of the club, as well as Mr. Cullen. Don't miss this treat, the poster concluded. Motto: fun without vulgarity. Blessing the chance which had brought us to Donegal upon this day, I hastened back to the hotel, showed the poster to Betty, and 3 minutes later we were sallying forth in quest of the town hall, whose entrance proved to be up a little court just across the street. The prices of admission, so the bill announced, were 2 shillings, 1 shilling, and 6pence. And I consulted with the abashed young man at the door as to which seats we should take. He advised the shilling ones, and we thereupon paid and entered. I wondered afterwards where the 2 shilling seats were, for the shilling ones were the best in the house. Although it was nearly time for the performance to begin, we were almost the first arrivals, but we soon heard heavy feet mounting the stair, and quite a crowd of men and boys began to file into the 6-penny seats at the rear. A few girls and women came forward into the shilling seats, but, from the look of them, I suspected that they were deadheads, and I feared that Mr. Cullen did not reap a great fortune from that benefit. There was a tiny stage at one end of the hall, and the stage manager, after the habit of all such, was having his troubles, for he could not get the footlights, a strip of gas pipe with holes in it, to work. We thought for a while that he was going to blow himself up, and the whole house along with him, but he gave up the struggle at last. The pianist played an overture, and the curtain rose. I have never seen the whole of Robert Emmet, but from what I saw of it that night, I judged that it must have been written for a star, for nobody does much talking, except Emmet himself. He, however, does a lot, and it was fortunate that, in this instance, he was impersonated by Mr. Cullen, for I am sure none of the other actors could have learnt the part. Mr. Cullen proved to be a hatchet-faced old gentleman without any teeth, but he had a pleasing voice, and Emmett's grandiloquent speech from the dock was greeted with applause. Of the two farces I will say nothing, except that they were not really so bad as one would expect, once the actors had recovered from their embarrassment when they perceived two strangers present. But the feature of the evening was the songs, which were many and various and well rendered. I remember only one of them, which we then heard for the first time, but which we were to hear many times thereafter, a lilting, catchy air, in which the audience assisted with the chorus, which ran something like this. It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, the sweetest land I know. Goodbye, Piccadilly, farewell, Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart is there. It is the old, old theme of the Irish exile longing for home, the theme of I know not how many poems, from the time of St. Columba, banished overseas and thinking long of Derry mine, my own oak grove, little cell, my home, my love. Down through Father Dollard's lilting, song of the little villages. The pleasant little villages that grace the Irish glens, down among the wheat fields, up amid the winds. The little white-walled villages, crowding close together, clinging to the old sod, in spite of wind and weather. Ballytarsney, Ballymore, Ballyboden, Boyle, Ballingarry, Ballymagorry, bide the banks of Foyle. Ballylineen, Ballyporeen, Bancha, Ballisadair, Ballybrack, Ballinalack, Barna, Ballyclare. 2. The tender verses by Stephen Gwynne, with which I will close this already perhaps too poetical chapter. Ireland, O Ireland, centre of my longings, country of my fathers, home of my heart. Overseas you call me, why an exile from me? Wherefore sea severed, long leagues apart? As the shining salmon, homeless in the sea depths, hears the river call him, scents out the land, leaps and rejoices in the meeting of the waters, breasts weir and torrent, nests him in the sand. Lives there and loves, yet, with the years returning, rusting in his river, pines for the sea, sweeps down again to the ripple of the tideway, roamer of the ocean, vagabond and free. Wanderer am I, like the salmon of thy rivers. London is my ocean, murmurous and deep. Tossing and vast, yet through the roar of London, reaches me thy summons, calls me in sleep. Pearly are the skies in the country of my fathers, purple are thy mountains, home of my heart. Mother of my yearning, love of all my longings, keep me in remembrance, long leagues apart.